All right, great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the session on a circular economy for capital equipment at the Business Solves conference. I am Ke Wang from the platform for accelerating the circular economy, and I will be your moderator today. For those of you who might be wondering, what exactly is capital equipment? The term comes from accounting. It refers to assets in a balance sheet with a long lifespan and high value. And these assets are usually critical for the production of goods and services. And that covers a huge range of products, right? From trains, to elevators, wind turbines, to manufacturing equipment, data center machinery, medical scanners. Most of them are for professional use, either in a business to business or business to government setting. Now, we all understand just how important capital equipment is for our businesses and economy. What we might not be aware of is how important they are also for the environment. The industry has a heavy footprint in both resource use and greenhouse gas emission. It uses about 7 billion tons of raw materials every year, and that includes more than half of all the metals the world uses. But it's also an industry which has been spearheading the transition toward the circular economy. Many circular practices, such as refurbishment and remanufacturing, have existed in the industry long before the term circular economy was even invented. So in recent years, a group of forward-thinking business leaders have come together to further advance and accelerate the transition. They have set up Capital Equipment Coalition both in North America and in Europe. So today, we're very happy to welcome 3 senior business leaders from the Capital Equipment Coalition as panelists in our session. We have Ms. Maria Rebergen, Head of Sustainability and CSR at DLL. And Maria, I know you're still recovering from a flu, but thank you very much for your dedication to be with us today.
Lovely to be here, thank you.
Welcome. We also have Dr. Roger Matella, Chief Sustainability Officer at General Electric. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Harold Tepper, Program Lead of Circular Economy at Royal Philips. Welcome, Harold.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, so we'll start with a few questions from my side, and then we'll turn to our audience. So to our audience, you can submit your questions at any time in the chat box. We'll channel them to our speakers later in the session. So, Maria, Roger, and Harold, my first question is about motivation. So what are the primary motivations for the capital equipment industry in general, and your companies in particular, to move towards circular economy? How much of that impotence for change is internal recognition of the value at stake? And how much of that comes from external shifts underway that are creating an imperative to respond? Maybe may I start with you, Maria?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much for the question and for organizing this webinar. It's very exciting. And as what you say, we indeed see the capital equipment industries rapidly moving towards a more circular economy. And yeah, I think it's quite logical, to be honest. In the first place, there's of course a huge environmental gain. Circular economy strategies can be instrumental to mitigate climate impacts. And given that 67% of global greenhouse gas emissions are related to material management, so that's a huge impact. And we also see that only 8.6% of all the minerals, fossil fuels, metals, and biomass that enter the world's economy each year are cycled back. And it was a figure presented in the most recent Circularity Gap report. So probably you all know about it. And it really surprised me because it's so limited. And in addition to the environmental impact and waste and so on, it also meets a huge cost element for businesses. And there's a huge potential for companies to improve efficient use of what is already there. we can extend the lifetime, and there's a huge potential to increase the value of capital equipment beyond single life cycles, of course. And we can recycle resources back into use at the end of life. So we can be much more cost efficient when switching to circular models. That's already quite a good motivation, I think. And it even makes more sense with the current rise of raw material prices. And even more so with the current supply chain disruptions, which you also see. And we see that our customers are really well underway, and DLL is there to support them with our usage-based concepts and our end-to-end financial solutions for the complete asset lifecycle. So it creates a second and even third life revenue streams, and it drives the transition to a circular economy. So as you see, for example, with our partners in tech, they all are accelerating commitments for recycling and remanufacturing due to material scarcity and consumer demand. And for example, our big iron manufacturing partners, they also recognize the value of materials, and they recognize the potential of second and third life sales. And even more so with the current supply chain disruptions, as what I already said. So yeah, I'm quite sure that it's also the same in other sectors and in healthcare. So I guess Roger and Harold see the same trend in their medical equipment sales, for example. I think their Gold Seal and their Diamond Select programs, probably they see the same, isn't it?
Yeah, Roger, Harold, would you like to chime in? Maybe Roger, start.
Okay, well, no, I would thank you. And thank you for asking the question, and thank you for organizing this topic. It's such an important topic at a critical time. And I would agree that yes, this issue, both in healthcare and our energy businesses and our aviation businesses, is all front and center. I think folks know GE is a leading provider of healthcare equipment. We make both renewable energy equipment, onshore, offshore wind turbines, grid equipment, gas turbines, and of course, jet engines. So this is all the type of capital equipment that I think are relevant here. And in terms of your question about our motivations, it's both, I think, internal and external. I don't know that I would place one higher than the other. I think we do it for both reasons and for each reason. Internally, we've made a lot of commitments to stewardship, to sustainability. We've made very significant ESG commitments, including being carbon neutral on our scope 1 and 2 emissions, being an ambition to be net zero on our scope 3 emissions for the products we sell, which includes our jet engines and our turbines and our healthcare equipment by 2050. And we're proud of the fact we have one of the strongest environmental performances of any company globally. And we've had very strong programs for product safety and product quality. We have strong programs for human rights and supply chain. And the notion of a circular economy then really is the next iterative step. It's the focus on products, the focus on stewardship, but being stewards of the environmental impacts of our products through the entire cycle. And we have a global supply chain, so it's a global lens we bring to product circularity. We have more to do. I wouldn't pretend, we'll talk about this a little more, I wouldn't pretend we're probably where we want to be or need to be, but this is probably a top 3 focus, I think, in terms of our ESG goals and our sustainability goals. So that's our internal motivation. It's part of these other commitments we've made and knowing we want to extend that to our products. Externally, and I imagine we'll talk about this more in our discussion too, undoubtedly a top growing focus, a top issue for our customers. Lots of stakeholders are interested in this, but let's start with our customers. Our customers really want to understand our ESG performance. Product circularity fits with both the E and the S of ESG. And so to some extent, it's a necessity. It's not a nice to do or an optional thing from our customers' perspective. And it's also a competitive advantage. I imagine we'll talk about that too, but the more we can be a leader in this space, the more it's going to give us a competitive advantage with our customers as they're thinking about various suppliers for projects that they're bidding.
Great, thank you, Roger. And Harold, how does it work for Philips?
Yeah, what can I add? Eh? So I think a lot of good things have already been said, and also from my end, thanks for organizing this. Because indeed, as you said in your opening statement, the capital equipment sector is such an important part in terms of the impact and the role we can play, and it's not always as visible, right? It's because maybe it's not so operational in the consumer space, right? So many people in circular economy think about plastics and maybe consumer electronics, but we have a big part to play. And in some senses, we are also very much ahead. So maybe we can inspire also during this session. Yeah, if you think about why did we step into a circular economy, we have a long-standing history on sustainability, environmental sustainability, decades of environmental sustainability programs, and I think we were one of the early adopters also of circular economy, one of the founding partners of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Basically because of the word economy and circular economy, right? So we realized very early on that there's business value in this, and not only direct business value, but we also see this as a great driver for innovation, right? It really triggers our designers and our business model innovators in our company to really think ahead and make everything we do future proof. And we have seen that also over the years, right? And also it's maybe logical, like when you make capital equipment, there's inherently a high value in everything you make. So there's also a high incentive to take it back, to refurb it, to give it a second life, to bring it back to the market, maybe a third time, a fourth time, etc. And I'm sure we will touch upon that also later on in this call. So that's one end, the business value, and the other end, and indeed, I'm with Roger. It's two ends of the same coin. There's also just the sustainability imperative, right? The way we are treating this world is just not sustainable. And indeed, a circular economy is and should be responsible for more than half of the climate goals, right? So if we don't move rapidly to the circular economy, we just are too slow in adopting the Paris climate goals, and we have all seen the a little bit disappointing progress on the COP26. So there's still a lot to do. And maybe to add one figure to that, so why is this important also for a company that's not only a capital equipment company but also focused on healthcare? Healthcare, it by itself as a sector has a big footprint. Right, so the healthcare sector alone is responsible for 5% of the world's global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's a very heavy equipment industry. It's very heavy in terms of hardware use. I think there's 13 kilo of waste produced every year with every hospital bed. So there's a lot to do there. And that's also a big opportunity for us because then we can really team up with our customers to move this transition towards a circular economy.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, Harold. I think putting what you have said all together, there's really a wide range of both internal and external motivation. And it's great to see the different stars are aligning toward the same direction. And you talk about innovation, Harold. So innovation, right? That's usually the answer from the business community to turn any challenges into opportunities. And so my next question is, could you maybe share an example of how your company has had to innovate as part of adopting circularity in your business, and what insights have emerged from that work? Since you talked about innovation, Harold, can I start with you?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And there's so much to be said about this, but I think it's a continuous innovation, right? So I would not pick out one particular example, but we had to innovate our business models. We had to innovate the way we look at take back of our equipment, how we approach then also our customers if they are at the end of a use cycle, and approaching them to talk about maybe selling a new piece of equipment. Can we do that in a circular way? Can we always do a trade-in offer? That's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, we also are still quite big in consumer products. And as you probably know, in the consumer market, it's much more difficult for a single enterprise to control this whole value chain. So there we said, okay, at least when we started this 10 years ago, we said, this is not the biggest impact that we can have at the moment by moving to new business models, etc. And we decided to start at the other end to think about how can we get more non-virgin materials in our products. So there we have had a massive innovation towards putting recycled plastics in our coffee machines, vacuum cleaners, toothbrushes, etc. And basically only now over the last years, it turns out that the market is ready also for different business models there in terms of try and buy models, rental models, operational leases, etc. So I think my answer to your question is, if you also say what insights that you get out of this whole innovation roadmap, if you will, then the one thing is really that for any company that wants to start on this roadmap, really think about what are the specifics of your product portfolio and what does circularity mean for different different elements of your portfolio. Right. So as I said, so in our business to business market, it's just a completely different ball game as it is in the business to consumer market. And why I say this is a continuous journey, because it goes on and on and on, because it started with thinking about what does it mean for innovation in the different businesses. And now it goes deeper to say, okay, but what does circularity mean for somebody in design? What does it mean for somebody in finance? What does it mean for somebody in marketing and sales? So it's also innovating your internal functions and roles, so to speak.
Interesting. Yeah. So continuous innovation journey, no one size fits all, and it's also a deep organizational innovation.
Yeah, definitely.
And Roger, GE is also a highly innovative company. What's your experience here?
Well, thank you. Innovation is my favorite word, of course. So I love to hear us all speaking from the same page, and then I appreciate what you said, but I think innovation is the key, is going to be the theory that solves all these challenges we're collectively trying to work on together. And I maybe share an example of something we've been doing for a while in this space, and we're pretty mature on, an example of something that's kind of cutting edge and new. And the one that we're more mature on is, I think, shows the innovation in business relationships. The second one shows the innovation in technology. For 20 years, our healthcare business has run a program called Gold Seal. And I think very much like Harold was talking about, it starts with giving our customers the business option of lease returns and buyback programs. So we start at the beginning of these relationships, thinking of the entire life cycle of our relationship with the customer on these products, and how do we want to start it and how do we anticipate ending it. Making sure we're designing this equipment so it can be refurbished, it can be updated, whether that's for that same customer or a new one, that we're reclaiming parts and materials and refurbishing and repurposing for other purposes. And so 20 years in this program, we're proud of the fact that at the end of the life, we're able to recycle 94 to 96% of parts from this. But it's more than just the technology. It's making sure we're working with our customers at the outset to understand, do they want upgrades along the way? Do they want hardware updates? Do they want software updates? Is this something they want to use? And then we find another user for it. And so we've had this experience of understanding circularity is more than just the technology. It's about the relationship, the needs of our customers, and the business. And that's been helpful in this more mature space. In the newer space where we're talking about innovation, we're talking about pure technology here. Cutting edge issues is looking at renewable energy, for example. We're a manufacturer of not only wind turbines, but wind turbine blades. And you can imagine, as we build more wind turbines, they all have 3 blades. These blades are gigantic. They're only getting bigger. And it's critical, as we're trying to do something really positive for the planet, for sustainability and climate change, that we're increasingly thinking about the life cycle of this technology too. We can't just assume it's just positive because it's renewable energy. We have to be thinking through the life cycle. So we have a first of its kind agreement to recycle the majority of the blades in the United States that we use for repowering. So if you see wind turbine facilities in the US, every so often we repower those. We make them more powerful. They can generate more electricity. That includes bigger and better blades. And so rather than putting those blades in a landfill, we've been able to work to use them in cement production. So 90% of our blades can be used. That's a 27% in reduction in emissions, CO2 emissions from the cement production, 13% reduction in water consumption. And a single wind turbine blade that can weigh 7 tons can be recycled through this process to avoid 5 tons of coal, 2.7 tons of silica, limestone, and so on. And not using the raw materials. So this is a little newer, a little cutting edge. We're more at the forefront of this, but I think it demonstrates the notion of innovation. Renewable energy is key. We want to generate renewable energy, but it's not the full answer. And we have to be thinking more thoughtfully about circularity of even things that are seen as very positive and sustainable at the outset.
Yeah, totally. I would think circular economy and the energy transition should really go hand in hand, right? They should be best friends. And I really like the way you kind of like separated, the innovation focus for mature space and for the new technology space. That's quite interesting. So I picked up this customer relationship element from your insights, Roger, and I would like to also check with Maria and Harold to see what has been the experience of DLL and Philips in this, because we often talk about new business models, and for circular business models, one of the very much discussed benefit is that it provides opportunity to shift customer relationships. And yeah, maybe can I start with Maria? What is the journey on this?
Yeah, on customer relationships, you mean? Yeah, I indeed see that change over the last years. And what I overall see is that parties come closer together. It's really strengthening partnerships also with the customers. Really all of them, customers, vendors, lessees, all have their active role now in managing a portfolio of equipment. So there's a win-win-win all the way around. The manufacturer and distributor keep the equipment in top shape to increase the long-term value. More end users can benefit from high-performing assets and technology, and DLL can offer the financing solutions for every stage of life, which, by the way, also we had to innovate over the years, from ownership models to really financing usage models. That's also very interesting. For example, 10 years ago, we focused only on that first life cycle, provided financial solutions for that, and after that first life cycle, it just went to waste, so to say. So now we, together with customers, look very carefully at the equipment that's in place. And instead of bringing in new ones, like what Harold and Roger also already described, we together organize the upgrade of the existing equipment. So we reuse components, whatever the materials, the frames, we extend the life of the equipment. And from a sustainability perspective, of course, that's much better, but also from a cost perspective for customers, since refurbished options, can be, let's say, 60% cheaper than new equipment. But you can only do that, and that is how the customer relation changes when you do this together. It strengthens the relation with the end customer. You establish a longer term relation, and even customer lock-in, although I don't like that word that much. Maybe it's just my Dutch translation to it, but customer lock-in sounds very brutal. So let's call it at least a longer term relation with mutual benefits, because equipment stays for a longer term at that customer, and you just together better understand the equipment, the use of the equipment, and how you can constantly upgrade it again. So that's a longer term relation, and that longer term relation also builds more trust between all the parties. And it's, well, you could say it's even like nature, like a natural ecosystem of all parts interconnected. So I think that's a very interesting shift in customer relations.
Yeah, interesting. And Harold, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I would say partnerships is the keyword here, right? Just like Maria is saying, it's really I think also if you talk about value, because often people ask what is now the business case for circular economy, and then if you think classical business case, you think, okay, what kind of value is there still in the material when you take it back? But I think the upside value of the much more intimate partnerships that come out of these new business models is just way bigger, right? And it's like Maria is saying, it turns you from a more transactional relationship that maybe you have once every 10 years if your equipment lasts a long time. It turns it into almost day-to-day partnership where you feel responsible for the uptime of your machines, getting the maximum value out of it. And the customer is sort of released from the pain of maintaining and owning the system. But you can then also play with it much easier to say, okay, the equipment is now there, we can upgrade it. As we know, right, many upgrades of systems are software upgrades, or many different versions of systems are software differences. So you can more easily play with that with the customer, say, do you want to try out a more high-end version of this equipment for a while, because we've seen it work in other customers, and you can take it away if it doesn't work. And you can apply that also to huge pools of equipment. If we have a monitoring as a service deal where maybe 1,000 monitors are rolled out across hospitals, then we can play with it and see where which type of equipment works the best, instead of always having to go into this old investment decisions of customers that are always high barriers. You can just tone it down and tone it up on a day-to-day basis if you would want to. So I think that's great. And I think, again, what we also see, and I think that's maybe a lucky situation also to be in the healthcare sector. As I said, healthcare is responsible for a large part of the greenhouse gas emissions. But everyone working in healthcare is also so much focused on making lives of people better. And so every doctor has sworn this oath of Hippocrates to do no harm. And the healthcare by nature realizes more and more that you cannot put healthy people on an unhealthy planet. So we see more and more hospitals really coming up with their own climate action and circular economy targets, and reaching out to suppliers like us, and I'm sure it's the same for GE, to say, we want to be the first circular hospital in this region. Can you help us? Right. So that's also big value, that if you are a front runner, you can actually cater for these questions and co-create with these hospitals on what does it mean to be a fully circular system, and do that together.
Yeah, very interesting. I really like the word co-creating and really become partners with your customer. I think that's also a unique position maybe the capital equipment industry enjoys, right? You can have deep long-term relationship with your customers, and circular business model is a really great way to further strengthen that. Maybe if I can pick up the second category Roger has just mentioned. So for the new space, right, wind turbines, renewable energy, where the innovation speed is very high. So one potential dilemma would be this innovation speed and lifetime extension, right? When you have product categories that are undergoing very rapid, short innovation cycles, which might make older products becoming obsolete even before they reach the technical end of life. I think the example you gave on repowering of wind turbines might be an interesting solution or example to try to reconcile this potential dilemma. But just want to hear from any of you how do you see this? Has your company encountered such dilemma, and how did you deal with that?
I can say something about it. I don't think all of this around circular economy is about reframing, right? So I wouldn't frame it as a dilemma, because I think it's coming from thinking in individual products. So this comes down, and your example is spot on. It comes down to how do you design your products. I think we are, many companies are now undergoing a massive shift to modular design, platform-based design. And I think the example of Roger is a prime example of that, right? It's not about a turbine that you take down and you put down a new turbine, but you can continuously upgrade the system on the go. And we do that as well. So the whole journey started with a take back of large-scale medical equipment and refurbish and bring it back to the same customer or another customer. Now more and more we do upgrades on site, right? So you go into a hospital and you sort of strip the machine, but only the relevant parts, and you build it back up again there and in a much quicker time, and with much less downtime and less cost for both us and the customer. There is a new machine there with the latest state-of-the-art technology. That's not easy, right? Because you talk about products becoming obsolete. So that this really is a continuous journey of designing from the get-go the products as future-proof as possible. To think ahead, okay, what could be changes in the future, and how do I build my platforms in such a way that I can continue to build on those platforms?
Yeah, very interesting. Upgradability starting with design. And throughout life cycle. Yeah, I just want to maybe a quick note to our audience. Please feel free to ask our panelists any questions. You can do that by typing your question in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring the chat box. I see there are a few questions coming in. Yeah, there's one from Christina saying the capital equipment industry has already made real progress on adopting circularity as what we have described. What lessons can be taken from the capital equipment industry's transition to circularity that can be applicable to other sectors, such as consumer products?
Consumer products, Harold, that's really your space, I guess, isn't it?
Agreed.
Yeah, no, I think it's going both ways. So I gave a little bit of a glimpse on that already earlier, right? So if what we learn from consumer products in the other ways that we have there built up a lot of expertise on embedding recycled plastics and sustainable plastics, bio-based plastics in our consumer products, and we are now moving that to the medical realm, which is more heavily regulated, etc. So we're trying to learn what works there, what doesn't work, and how can we, sort of bridge that expertise. And the other way around, learning from the new business models in the business to business space, really trying to apply that also in the consumer space. So with take back models. That's why I mentioned try and buy, right? Because I think it doesn't always have to be a full-fledged X as a service model, right? You can also say, okay, and we see that works very much with the more pricey products in the consumer space, to say we can offer this as a try and buy. Maybe it's a big investment decision for you as a consumer. Maybe you don't trust that it works for you, and we have that with our hair removal products. They honestly don't work for everyone, so you can try it out for a couple of months with a monthly fee, and if it doesn't work for you or you don't like it, you can send it back, and then of course we refurbish. But there's also the option to buy, and that's also something we learned also from the more business to business realm, that you need to think about your customer. What is the best model that works for this customer? It's not like that there's only one business model that works. The crux is that you take responsibility as a company of what happens with the products at the end of the lifetime. And there are many ways to do that. So I think those are a couple of the lessons. And the other lesson, I think that's also universal is this concept of what is your integral business case. And also the Capital Equipment Coalition has published a paper, I think 2 years ago, on value drivers for the circular economy. And so it's an interesting read, I think, because it hinges on the material value, but also the market value, the value of partnerships, etc. And I think that's really helpful to look at, also if you're a company that just embarks on this terrain, to realize that there are many ways that the circular economy creates value for you, and somehow you have to try to factor that in your business decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's what we call, again, integral business case concept.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harold, for sharing that. Yeah, I see another. Sorry, Maria, were you?
No, yeah, I was only triggered by the question that I really like such questions that you take lessons from one industry or sector and you bring it to others. So it's and the cases that Harold just described are very interesting, but also we at DLL also learned a lot of other sectors of consumer markets. So, for example, the transition to pay-per-use models, that was challenging for us too. It was new when we first started in DLL offering finance solutions. It was much more focused on ownership. Then we transitioned and innovated towards financing usage models. But now you have the pay-per-use models, and in the consumer market, you had already a lot of examples there. So it's very nice to learn vis-a-vis versa, because we now also set up a separate business unit ourselves to offer customized pay-per-use solutions for our partners. But we learned a lot on how that was dealt with small coffee machines or what have you, all these type of small consumer goods. And that really gives you a lot of new insights, and it helped us to adapt our internal systems. It helped us to adapt and learn how we can evaluate risks, how we do billing and collecting and all of that. So, and that is what I very much like of these type of sessions too, that we can really learn from each other. So again, thanks for organizing these type of webinars and discussions to bring in those experience from other sectors and innovate collectively.
Indeed, the learnings are always both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another aspect I think was mentioned earlier on was financial solutions. And I know both DLL and GE work on financial solutions. So, we've been talking about the benefits of circular business models, changing customer relationships, creating new revenue streams, et cetera, and how do we get the financiers, the investors on board? What do they need to understand about how circularity is impacting long-term value for the capital equipment manufacturers? Roger, may I start with you?
Well, thank you. No, great question. And when I think of circularity and finance, I may come at it from the other side of the coin, which is an assumption that our investors expect us to do this, and it's not a very hard sell. As I mentioned earlier, when we look at the E, S, and G, the environmental part of this is pretty obvious, right? But I always thought the E is the easiest part of this to understand, and so obviously the stewardship of resources, recycling, not landfilling resources, trying to be efficient with how we use precious resources, that comes in pretty obviously. But what has not always been super obvious to me is the way this intersects with the S part of ESG, the social part, and really the expectation. And I totally accept it and understand it, but it's not, I think, as self-apparent or obvious as the environmental part is. But we clearly understand from our investors, from our customers who are focused on ESG, and this includes sustainable finance, that product stewardship is really critical to the S part. That includes product safety, includes product quality, and includes the circular economy and product stewardship. I think for a lot of the themes we've been talking about, it's more than just the environment. The environment is important, but it's the way we utilize resources. It's the relationships with different stakeholders and the impacts of these products that go into the impacts to people that are relevant to social. So my perspective is a little bit less on how do we convince investors that this is important. That's usually a pretty easy sell. It's more, are we actually satisfying our investors? This goes to the external part that I spoke about earlier, in making sure that they're comfortable that we are given the appropriate weight on these issues to the E, S, and G. As I said earlier, I'm always very transparent on these issues. I was happy to talk about our healthcare program. I'm happy to talk about our recycling blades, but this is certainly an issue where as a company, we have a lot more work to do. I appreciate being inspired here by my colleagues, but it's a top 3 issue for us when we look at our sustainability priorities, is enhancing our product programs generally with this ESG lens. Proud of some of the progress we're making, but no, we have a lot more to do.
Thank you. For
Okay, maybe I can just add something more from the finance perspective. I think it's becoming easier and easier to convince, from a finance perspective, any party, because like what I was sharing in the beginning, when you see that that there's a rise of raw material prices, virgin material prices, and when you see there are also current supply chain disruptions, I think it's not about any doubts anymore if this is an economical case. I think it's rather clear. This is not a tree huggers sustainability story. If you can really tap into that huge potential for a more efficient use of the equipment that is already out there, and extend the lifetime, recycle resources back into use at the end of the life, it's much more cost efficient. So, and not only for yourself as a company being more cost efficient, but also offering lower cost equipment, refurbished equipment, through which you can search new market segments and serve a new customer groups. So you also open up a broader range of customers. So I think that all comes back to a very economically sound model. So it's nothing about just saving the world, which we also have to do, but it's a very economically rational case. So I think that's becoming clearer and clearer for investors and for the finance industry at large.
Yeah, that is really fantastic to hear. I think that the best way to scale circular economy is really to make it a logical choice. right, for companies and for
Yeah, and
investors.
then it's creating second and a third life revenue stream. So we would say no.
Absolutely, the business case will replicate itself.
Yeah.
Great. I don't know whether you can see the chat box. We've got Kuba posting a number of questions. We won't have the time to go through each of the questions with every speaker. So maybe may I ask you to pick one your favorite question and answer to that. So I'll read them out. The first is intersections between circularity and sharing economy. Second is example of circular economy, public health, and clinical medicine. The third is seeing the labor market. Oh, that's an interesting one. That was circulating labor. I think that's what the question means. And the fourth is, are there any good examples of the CE concept in the global labor market and artificial intelligence? Further on, there are also questions on telehealth, very wide range of questions.
Yeah.
Maybe pick one, Harold.
Let me maybe pick the last one, right, on CE and telehealth, because I think what we are seeing is that the scope of what we call circular economy is also broadening, and rightly so, I think, right? So to us, the true value of the circular economy is in creating maximum value for your customers and for society with a minimal material footprint. It's as simple as that, right? So maximum value with minimal material footprint. So that starts all with dematerialization. So the whole shift to a more digital and platform-based society and digital companies is a huge lever and huge accelerator in this space. And that's also discussions that we are having very much internally to really onboard our digital transition, our digital businesses in this discussion, but also with our customers, right? So the CE and telehealth is on the spot, right? So the more you can deliver your healthcare value at the home, the better it is, because these hospitals are these high equipment, high waste, high energy types of places. And if you can keep people out of those places, then you deliver a better value for lower price and lower cost of material, or lower footprint, lower environmental cost, if you will. So I think that's a big relationship, and it's actually one key topic that we are working with with the capital equipment industry, to think about, okay, this is a nice story, but how do you then measure that? How does that really change your innovation decisions, and how can we onboard this also in the circular metrics framework, so that this is also incentivized going forward.
Thank you, Harold. Mariah, what will be your pick?
Well, maybe the intersections between circularity and sharing economy, because I think that's an interesting question. I think many people, I don't know what Roger and Harold see, but sometimes it's just mix those two concepts, and it's just put all together. And on the one hand, I do understand it, because there is a similarity, because you want to extend the life, the usage, and maximize the utilization rate of equipment. So in that sense, to really do that to the max, and at the right moment refurbish it again and extend the lives and second and third life all over again, right? So that is about extending lives. It is about usage. It is about usage optimization and maximization. But sharing models in itself, and the sharing economy. So the sharing economy is a very, very good new trend, a very, very good incentive to further stimulate circular models. On the other hand, it's not per se leading to it. So I would challenge anybody developing a sharing model to really take into account the options, how to really approach it from a circular perspective too. So really integrate those. Otherwise, you could, if you put it bluntly, start a sharing concept with the most polluting linear design type of equipment. And I'll put it bluntly, of course, but I hope you understand what I mean. So really a very good start, because it's going away from ownership, which, by the way, sometimes is still difficult. You see some traditional markets, or so also when we talk about the entire globe. For example, in some other countries, Latin America or what have you, this is very much an emerging type of topic, right? But very much to gain still. So in more traditional markets or more traditional products, people still tend to own things. So the sharing economy and circular economy both move away from that ownership to usage. But saying that sharing is per se fully circular, I would challenge everybody setting up sharing models to make it fully circular. You had the right first steps made away from ownership to usage already, and now integrated the fully circular thinking into that sharing model, I would say.
Yeah, very clear message. Sharing has a potential to deliver circularity, but not automatic.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's what I see. I don't know, Harold and Roger, if you see the same, but that is what I would like to stress. Yeah.
Yeah, Roger, would you like to build upon that, or would you like to pick a different question?
Well, I don't have much to add here, because I was really interested in the question on the sharing economy. I appreciate it being raised, because I frankly hadn't thought about that before. And so I wanted to, in my own mind, I wanted to just thank the person who raised it, Kuba, for flagging it, because I want to give it more thought. And I appreciate Marjorie's thinking on it, because I think it's a fair connection to make. And I think we need to be thinking about it more strongly. So that I'm going to limit my comment to that for the moment, but just be appreciative of it being flagged and something I want to give more thought to.
Yeah, great. Maybe if I may pick up the word metrics from you, Harold, you mentioned, and so it's great to see that more and more companies have begun setting commitments around circularity. Right, Roger, you mentioned earlier, GE is doing that as well, but there's not yet convergence on how circularity should be measured. Right, so this has led to a wide range of types of commitments. So now, maybe Harold, where do you see the circularity measurements and the commitments heading over the next few years? And what should companies be doing to make sure they don't get left behind or get left in the wrong lane somehow?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's I can speak for hours about it. So there's not one answer to that. That's also why this topic is a priority topic for the Capital Equipment Coalition, and I can also explain why. So why is this difficult? I think by the nature of the circular economy, there's so many different ways to close loops that maybe it's also naive to think that there will be one metric that covers it all, right? So and it took the world, I think, 20 years to get to this one standard for climate action in greenhouse gas emissions. And I think there's an argument to make that the circular economy is even more complex because it's a multi-headed beast, right? On how you can do that. But that doesn't stay away from, we need to do it, and we need to align further, because the circular economy is such an important transition that needs to happen, and it needs to happen between companies and governments. So we need to have develop a common language. So that's why metrics is important. I would say for a company that starts with this, I would have two advices. One is just go ahead, set your own targets on anything that you realize is important in terms of circular economy for your company, and get it going. And like I said in the beginning, that's also what we did, and it's continuously in development, right? What does circular economy mean for different parts of your business? Try to define that and find a way to measure that, because that is how companies are driven, right? If you measure it, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So there is an element of go ahead and find the best metric, and at the same time, parallel to that, embrace the metrics externally that are converging. I think there's one area where I see converging metrics, which is around the area what I would call material flow metrics. So Marije already mentioned the Circularity Gap Report. That's a company or country or regional example of measuring material flows, inflows and outflows in a certain country or city or region. And the equivalent for companies is the CTI indicator that has been developed by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. There are a couple of more, but this is one that is open source and free to use for anyone. And that is basically converging and moving to a similar language. So it's important to jump on that bandwagon, because that will be a standard of measuring circularity. I think why the Capital Equipment Coalition is also very active in this topic is that this material flow metric cannot be the only solution. And the reason is that if you look only at material, these metrics look at molecules per se, right? They look at what happens to iron, what happens to plastics, So if you only look at that, then you enter on the lowest value version of the circular economy, and you start to talk about recycling only, because you don't differentiate between a molecule and a product. And I think that's where the capital equipment sector can have a great voice, because they are maintaining these heavy equipments with large value. So for us, the part of the circular economy that is around maintaining maximum value of your products for as long as possible, with extending lifetime, with refurb, with new business models, is such an important part, and it's maybe the biggest value part as well. So that is where I see the world develop, or at least I think the world needs to develop to get to a portfolio of metrics, if you will, that sort of addresses the different loops in the butterfly diagram of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So not only sort of the outer loop for the recycling, but also finds a way to measure dematerialization, or to measure upgrades, or to measure a reuse and refurb, or extending the lifetime, which is currently not the case.
Yeah, very insightful, Harold. It's a very, very complex topic, and thank you for helping us zoom in and then zoom out, right? So at a zoom out level, high level, we do need convergence. We already have some good indicators at the material level, but we need more good indicators for those inner loops at the product level. But at the same time, you pointed out that it's not just like we can all use a kind of a uniform set of indicators for every company. Every company is different, every function is different. So we need also tailored indicators to get things moving.
Can I just add one more thing on that same discussion? That indeed, circularity measurement tools, that you also have the Circulytics measurement tool that also assesses products and material flows, but it also enables company to measure circularity across their entire operations, including strategy, innovation, and material flows. That's also very interesting to have a look at. But I also see, and that is a very complex area, you see more and more regulations impacting all of us. And for example, in the European Union, there's already quite a lot happening, but it's also in the United States, in other areas of the world, same thing, same trends. I see the same trend. Like, for example, in Europe, you have the EU taxonomy, trying to find a common words classification system on what can be considered as green activities. And of the 6 objectives that are now determined, there are 6 objectives that are focusing on, and just 2 are now already determined, which is climate impact and climate mitigation, climate adaptation. But there is the 3rd one, and the next one is on circularity. So I would also keep an eye on those classification systems, EU taxonomy, because that will also be mandatory soon. So you better set up your internal systems and data and reporting also in line with those classification systems coming soon.
Yeah, get prepared, right?
Be prepared, because that will be quite complex, I think. But it will help all of us to have a common language on what we do consider to be green, or in this case, to be circular. So it might also help us to know, to measure, to report, and to steer in that direction.
Yeah. So for those of the audience who might be wondering about the 2 circular metric systems that Harold and Maria has mentioned, I also typed the names in the chat box. They're the two major framework for business, specific for business. So
you
now
want us to write it down?
Oh no, I added in the chat box. Circularity.
Oh, you did it. Yeah, I see it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, for audience who's interested in knowing a bit. And we have only 5 minutes left, so maybe I will ask my question. Coming back to the Capital Equipment Coalition, right, which you are all members of. So it's a group of companies coming together, let's say, this advanced circularity together. So why is this together element important? Why is collaboration between companies? You all have your own very different business areas. Why is it important for you to collaborate for this transition? Where is collaboration needed most, and how can we collaborate that better? Lots of questions, but about 1 minute and a half each, so we can close on time. And when I start with Roger, please.
Thank you for the question. So GE is a pretty large multinational global company, and as we approach the energy transition with everything we're doing, we always begin with the fact that no one company, no one entity can solve this alone. It really takes collaboration, it takes some odd bedfellows, and we'll collaborate with anybody, with companies, with NGOs, with governments, because at the end of the day, we want to see these issues move towards solutions. And we know the more we have partnerships and the more we bring diverse folks together towards these solutions, the more likely we're going to succeed. One concrete example of that, and no pun intended, I gave the example of the wind turbine blade manufacturing, recycling. We can't recycle wind turbine blades. What would we do with it? So we partnered with a cement company, right? So this is a kind of an odd bedfellows type arrangement that we're a high-tech innovation company making state-of-the-art wind turbine blades, and we're working with a cement company to shred them up, use 90% of them to recycle, and to help them achieve their sustainability goals too. And that's maybe one more angle on this is, our goals are our customers' goals or other companies' goals, and the more we can have these types of relationships, even cross-sector, cross industries, I think the more we're gonna be successful not only for our company but for these issues generally.
Great, very nice example. I remember that wind turbine with a cement company. Thank you, Roger, for sharing. And I move on to you, Maria.
Yeah, I think we already said it. It's for me, if you ask me about the importance of the Capital Equipment Coalition, it's just, for me, it's really essential to have such a place where capital equipment manufacturers and technology partners and finance can share in a pre-competitive environment about what's missing, what's needed, to measure the impact of circularity, like what we just discussed, but even more so to drive circularity. And it's really refreshing to share challenges and learn from each other about best practices and so on. So that's really crucial, I think, to collectively learn by doing and improve and set the standards to a higher level, because I really believe we need to accelerate with all the challenges the world is facing.
Right, learning, and we were talking about learning between capital equipment and consumer products earlier on, definitely learning. Harold.
Yes, I would say 2 reasons to join the Capital Equipment Coalition. One is to learn from each other, and the other is to drive change together. And these are obviously related to learn from each other. Yeah, everything that Roger and Maria have already said, and hopefully was also a bit inspiring from this call today to see there's so much to learn from each other, and together you go further than alone. But I think it's also has proven to be a great place for us to be one voice, right? Because we mentioned also issues with metrics. There are similar issues with regulations around the world. And so by coming together as a sector, maybe a non-traditional sector, right? Who would have thought that the capital equipment sector can position itself as a sector and say we have this common interest and a common voice and a common way where we say, okay, we can actually come up with great recommendations on how to change the metrics, on how to change the regulations to take away some barriers. So that has proven very useful for us, and that's also why it's such a privilege to be under the roof of PACE. So PACE is still the only global platform, I think, where companies and governments and knowledge partners are coming together. So the lines are very short. If we have an issue, we can bring it to the EU, or we can bring it to the regulators across the world, and try to drive the change together.
Yeah, great. So for our audience, if you're interested in, looking for partnership, looking for sharing learnings, looking to be part of the common voice and drive change together, in the chat box, you can find more information about the Capital Equipment Coalition. So we're actually already at the end of the hour. So thank you again, Mariah, Roger, and Harold for sharing your inspiring insights. And thanks everyone for tuning in and participating in the discussion. In the chat box, there are also a few other related sessions that might be of your interest. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you and goodbye.